So next up we have Sophie. Sophie has just the common or garden TTP and was diagnosed just a couple of years ago. Sophie's been a big supporter of TTP Network, not least due to her taking part in a coastal trek just a year after diagnosis and raising over £1,000 or over £1,200 for TTP Network. So a warm welcome to Sophie.
Morning everyone, I'm Sophie, mum, fiance, health and social care professional, and since the summer of 2023 a member of a very exclusive club, the TTP Patient Club. Didn't want to be part of the club, just wanted a baby, but you know, here we are. I've shared my story quite openly since my diagnosis because I do really believe that sharing and hearing a real person's experience, it makes a difference. I think it turns medical jargon into reality, and it takes TTP from being a rare statistic to something that happens to people, real people, people like us who are in this room today. I'll share the basics of my TTP journey today, but what I really wanted to focus on was the more human side of the experience, the emotions, the fear, the resilience, the stuff that we don't see in the medical textbooks. So in June 2023, I was sort of waddling towards the end of my first pregnancy, had all the usual suspects, backache, nausea, insomnia, crying at dishwasher adverts, all of the usual suspects, but I was doing okay. On the 13th of June that changed, and it changed quite quickly. I attended a routine midwife appointment, and as I was leaving the car park I started to get this flashing white light in my vision. I couldn't remember walking from the doctors back to the car, and I kind of just dismissed it since the insomnia catching up with me being pregnant. But things escalated quite quickly from there. That afternoon I found myself really confused. There was this 20-minute period of time I just couldn't account for. So I texted Dylan, my partner who spoke earlier today, and I asked him, what have we done today? Where have we been? Where am I supposed to be? And just on those texts alone, Dylan was obviously fairly confident something was a little bit off here. Little did I know that that experience that day was the first of sort of mini strokes that I would have over the course of the next 3 weeks, including one that caused me to lose complete control of the left side of my body and left me unable to walk for several minutes. Despite feeling unwell and having these really alarming symptoms, after attending A&E, the maternity triage, and the midwives noticing that my platelets were trending downwards fast, I was just dismissed by medical professionals. I was told, and this is a direct quote, it's just pregnancy. I was told I was being an overcautious first-time mum, and that was the problem here. Call it a mother's instinct, or probably, being frank, more likely just common sense, but we knew something was wrong. And we kept pushing for answers, but unfortunately we didn't get taken seriously until we reached quite a critical stage. When I went into labour, the gravity of the situation was recognised, and during that emergency visit to the maternity unit before Ola was born, the staff there kind of dismissed my platelet count. It tanked from 320,000 to about 80,000 in the space of a week. I'd got unexplained bruising, I was breathless, really confused, and I had really severe anaemia at this stage. But again, I was told it's just pregnancy, sent on my way with iron tablets, and that was kind of it. If we'd have known now what we know about platelet counts, then me and Dylan would have set up camp in the corridor. But you can only know what you know. On the night of July the 17th, my waters broke. I kind of remained as calm and collected as I could. Well, as calm and collected as someone can who's packed sort of 7 lip balms for going into labour. But upon blood tests at the delivery suite, a midwife put the needle into my arm and she said, "Gosh, you're a bleeder, aren't you?" And at the time I was like, that's not something that anybody wants to hear unless you're sort of auditioning for a Quentin Tarantino movie, then maybe that would land. But all of a sudden this flurry of medical professionals appeared. And it became evident that my platelet count was dangerously low at this stage. We'd hit the 50,000 mark and Arlo still hadn't been delivered. So within the hour, I was prepped for an emergency C-section under general anaesthetic, and as I signed this medical waiver, accepting this potential fate of you and your son might not come out the other end of this, I think that's when the gravity of the situation really hit for me. I sobbed. I was just thinking of Dylan the entire time, thinking that he didn't deserve to go through this, and I was so determined to fight, to see that this little soul that I'd grown for 9 months would get to Earthside safely. That was my one motivation. At that point, I knew I was about to fight for both my life and my son's, and in those moments, they didn't know I had TTP yet, but what they did know was that something was very wrong. I really vividly remember this sort of urgency and this rush in people's voices, and even then, all I could think about was, I'm going to meet my little boy. That was it. To me, looking back, it wasn't denial at that point, it was about survival, and that thought, however fragile it was in that moment, it carried me through, I think, at that stage. I didn't experience the magic moment of meeting my son as he entered the world, and that's still one sadness I carry with me. I wanted to be the first person that let him know he was safe and that he was loved, and TTP took that opportunity from me. But life-saving measures were still very well underway after my emergency caesarean, as my platelets just continued to tank. At this stage, I kind of felt like the NHS equivalent of like a mystery box challenge. Nobody really knew what to do with me. And for 4 days, they were working off this basis that I had HELLP syndrome. They tried platelet transfusions, but I kind of just absorbed them like a very ungrateful sponge, and nothing was changing. I look back on some of the more mundane moments of that time quite fondly. So my family were desperately trying to Google, how do we fix this? And in their infinite wisdom, they discovered that on Google, platelet counts can be improved by pomegranates. So at this stage, I'm being force-fed pomegranate seeds to try and cure TTP, which in hindsight is obviously absolutely ridiculous, but I look back at that quite fondly. I mean, I'd have preferred pomegranates over plasma exchange, but you know. The platelet transfusions weren't working, and my bloods were sent, as Dylan said earlier, on this worldwide tour across all over the place to try and work out what was happening. Within a couple of hours, by day 4, there was this small army of doctors at the end of my bed, and it felt very much like I was about to be voted off a medical reality show at this stage. But their faces told me everything I needed to know. The moment, to be honest, still haunts me to this day. I was holding Arlo, and not one of the consultants who stood there could look me in the eye and reassure me that I was going to be okay. I kept asking them, am I going to die? And there was just this silence, this really pregnant silence that gave me all the answers that I needed to know. Suddenly, I was blue lighted up to Birmingham, and I will never ever forget Cher's Believe blaring through the speakers of the ambulance. There is nothing like a bit of auto-tune to make it feel like the weirdest party ever when it's actually a medical emergency. But when I got to Birmingham, the diagnosis was pretty clear. It was TTP, rare, life-threatening, definitely not what I ordered. I was introduced to the life-saving procedure we all know and love as plasma exchange, and I do have to take this opportunity today to thank my consultant, Dr. Percy, and the nurses, Lida, Claire and Holly, as well as the entire team who treated me at the QE. I'd spent weeks leading up to my diagnosis feeling fairly confident that I was dying, and the reality is I was. Without their intervention, I wouldn't be here. The second that I met Claire, who was my initial nurse, and then Dr. Percy, I felt safe. And I can't explain to you the value of that feeling in these moments. I'm sure their first impression of me was more questionable. I was highlighter yellow, I was wearing 4-day-old pyjamas, and in my confusion, I was very much less focused on the life-threatening thing and just wanted a jacket potato and a Lucasade. I think that at this point, the look on Dr. Percy's face was a thing of, I think the blood clots might be causing some issues in the brain here, but I think it was more, I was being force-fed pomegranates for 4 days and I was just hungry. In the days that followed my diagnosis, I obviously had multiple treatments, and by day 3 as an inpatient, my platelets had gone from 13,000 back up to 170. There's so many moments that I carry with me as an inpatient, not being able to see Arlo because of the infection risk, being told off for brushing my teeth because of the bleeding risk, and a junior doctor coming in and telling me that I'd got cancer before being corrected. That was a whiplash of 15 minutes. But that time's also peppered with positive moments as well. Claire, Leader and Holly, who were my plasma exchange nurses, they were equal part experts and my personal cheerleaders. We bonded, we were rooting for these platelet counts to rise, and also discussed our favourite buys from the Middle Island Aldi. On discharge day, Claire came barrelling into the hospital room, completely out of breath, clutching this little bag. And she brought Arlo, my son, a little hand-knit cardigan. She was so worried I'd already gone home, she'd flown up these 6 flight of stairs. And for me, based on what I know of her, I know that probably pales into insignificance for her as the amazing nurse that she is. But for me, that moment was a lifeline. In the whirlwind of saving my life, as I'm sure lots of you experienced, I felt a bit like I was just a body to be fixed. And that really beautiful human act from Claire, it just reminded me that I mattered and that I was seen and that I wasn't just a patient in a bed, I was a person with a future. Recovering from major surgery, a TTP diagnosis and becoming a new mum, 0 out of 10, would not recommend to anybody, especially doing all 3 at once. And although I'm really lucky to have been left with minimal physical side effects, my mental health has taken a pretty major hit since diagnosis. I was diagnosed with PTSD and I particularly have struggled during things like the rituximab treatment as an outpatient. I spent weeks in this state of limbo where I was so desperate to be at home with Dylan and Arlo, but at the same time I was so scared to be away from that safety net. And during that time, everybody said, do not Google it. So the first thing I obviously did was open 14 tabs, Google it, convince myself I've got organ damage, and then cry for 4 days. But after sort of weeks of these countless hospital visits and the frantic sort of early hour postings into the Facebook group, I did start to feel hope again. My Adams level started to improve from undetectable back up to 99%. And I finally reached remission after 4 rounds of plasma, 4 rounds of rituximab, Kaplan, heparin, steroids, and blood transfusions. During those weeks to recovery, I was supported by Joe and the TTP network, who offered just completely unwavering support and also constant encouragement and strength from Dylan. Dylan is the best advocate that anybody could ever wish for. He continues to help me navigate the ups and downs of living with this rare, unpredictable condition, and he's even donated plasma several times since my diagnosis, although I am fairly convinced he only does it for the free Kit Kats. And of course, Leader and Dr. Percy. Dr. Percy is very calm and he's very direct in how he sort of speaks, and he kind of reminds me of a life jacket in a storm, which I think is probably the same for most of our consultants. No nonsense, no panic, always just there to keep me afloat. And for Leader, who I know won't want the spotlight on her, but I do have to just take a minute to thank her. I don't ever want to reduce nurses to angels, because angels don't juggle IV lines, they're not dealing with printer errors, they're not answering 5 million questions, but I can't think of a better word to describe Leader and also the other nurses that support us. I think I probably speak for a lot of us TTP patients when I say that the power of the TTP nurses and consultants, it can't be understated. We are so incredibly lucky to have you, and honestly, you're like heroes in our households. I'm still coming to terms with the fact that my immune system has this capacity to attack what it is meant to protect. And whilst I'm officially in remission, I now live in this sort of land of 3 monthly blood tests, as many of us do. For me, I kind of compare those tests to a bit like checking if the milk's gone off. It's risky, but it's kind of got to be done. I can stand here and I can look quite confident and I can speak as I am, but I won't pretend that I'm not scared of what my future holds with TTP. Particularly as a mum with TTP, my biggest fear is how this illness might steal moments from us. The energy to play, that calm to be present when your children need you, or the strength to sort of fully show up when I need to. I also now find myself juggling being a patient whilst also caring for patients myself in my own work, and that's a really strange and disorientating intersection sometimes. And life also now includes this much larger dose of fear that I didn't have before, a lot of health anxiety, and this sort of ongoing internal monologue that we all seem to have of, was that bruise there yesterday? But alongside the stress, there is also life. And that's real, brilliant life. Since my diagnosis, I've become a mum to the most beautiful, hilarious, feral child on the planet. I've become a fiance, a business owner, and somehow in all of this madness, I've also built really beautiful friendships with a lot of fellow TTP survivors. The Facebook group was a lifeline for me when I was first diagnosed, and it has introduced me to people I now call friends. I've got to mention two people in particular, which is Kate and Lucia, who are fellow survivors. I feel like we share this sisterhood now that is half trauma bond, half inappropriate WhatsApp messages at 2 o'clock in the morning, a lot of dark humour, this weird ability to sort of communicate entire conversations through memes, and we also have this talent for pretending that everything is absolutely fine, whilst clearly being one bad platelet count from completely just losing the plot. But I think there's nothing quite like gallows humour between people who've faced their own mortality and also had to drink hospital tea, because that is a whole experience on its own. So although I am embracing life after TTP, I will admit that I do sometimes struggle with survivor's guilt as well. It's like winning this really weird lottery where the prize is both still being alive but also carrying this really heavy emotional baggage. I think about the people a lot in our community who didn't make it, and I do carry them with me. And that's why I speak, and I continue to speak and work with NHS trusts where I can around the rare disease patient experience. It's not because I love being the TTP girl, but if my voice can help save someone's life or help them feel less alone or educate one midwife, one healthcare assistant, a consultant somewhere, that pain that I've experienced has some sort of purpose. I strongly believe that just because our condition is rare, it doesn't mean that we are rare in our humanity, in our worth, or our right to experience good care. Rarity should never be a reason for dismissal. It shouldn't be a reason for lack of understanding. It should be a reason for attention and for collaboration. We deserve to be heard, to be believed, and to have access to the same level of respect and care as any other patient. It shouldn't really depend on how common or how convenient our condition is. And I think that sense of responsibility sometimes does keep me going. Through my journey so far with TTP, I've recognised that unfortunately fear is just kind of part of the package. But I've also come to the conclusion that fear I have, it doesn't actually prevent me from dying, but it does run the risk of stopping me from living the life that I want to. So as I reflect over time, I think the real lesson for me about TTP isn't about getting rid of the fear, but about trying to make some room for it. Sitting next to it, because in a way it's kind of proof that I'm still here. And maybe that's what real living is, it's choosing to show up, even when you're absolutely terrified, even when the blood test results are pending. So before I'm dragged off stage for talking too long, I just want to say to anybody that is newly diagnosed here today or struggling with this diagnosis, aka me sometimes, there is life after TTP. It's a bit messier, it's a lot more emotional, and you will develop really weird emotional attachments to your haematology team. But it's life, it's glorious, it's unpredictable, and it's hard fought for life. Embrace the journey that we're on, stay hopeful, and remember, us TTPers, we might be few in numbers, but we make up for that in our fight. You're never alone. TTP doesn't define us, we define it through our strength, through our resilience, and our complete refusal to let it take away the life that I think we're all still meant to live.